So hopefully you were successful at building the model, but let's walk through the process in general. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to place my source server in sync. As you said, we're going to represent ticketing using a server. So we have our standard source server sync model, and then we're going to have a time path representing from the arrival to server 1. And with the time path, we can then set the travel time equal to, this was the random uniform 1, 2, 3 minutes, and so minutes are the default. And so we have a travel time from the arrival to ticketing, random uniform 1 to 3. The travel time for passengers to depart wasn't specified, so we'll just use a path object so that we can at least see the entities departing. Okay, so at this point I'm going to run the model and just make sure, again, that things behave as we expect. And so we can see entities moving, and so you can definitely see that we're sampling random times because some entities are passing other entities that would represent sampling either small or large times on that travel path. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rename my objects so I can give them names that are meaningful. So we're going to name arrivals. For my source, we're going to name the server ticketing, and we'll name the sync departure. While it's not necessary to rename the objects, it certainly improves the clarity of the model, especially when you're building, a large model. Okay, so we have our time path. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my arrivals, and if you remember, we have 800 arrivals, so that means I'm going to set my stopping condition to 800 arrivals, and so that means that the source will stop generating entities after the 800th arrival. We also said that entities arrive exponentially distributed in arrival times with a mean of 1.2 minutes. So we set that. And finally, we have to tell the ending type to set it to unspecified so that we don't know when the actual run is going to end, because it's going to depend on when the last arrival is served. So the last arrival, that 800th arrival, goes through ticketing and then departs, and that will be what actually stops the run. Okay, so we have the 800 arrivals, we have ticketing, we have the walking time. The next thing we need is ticketing. So we will specify the processing time on ticketing. Random, this time we can use the expression builder. I've just been typing these, but we can just as easily pull that down and do random, uniform, and then it prompts me for the values. So we want between 1 and 10. So we have random uniform between 1 and 10 minutes. And next we need to set the capacity. And so we have ticketing capacity here under initial capacity. And since we want to experiment with these different values, 5, 6, and 7, the easiest way to do that is to create a reference property. So I'm going to right click on initial capacity, click on the set reference property, and then at the very bottom of the list, create new reference property. And we're going to call this number agents or num agents. And so again, we right click on initial capacity on the property name, not on the property value. The property name pulls up and say new reference property num agents. So if we go back to our definitions now and go to properties, we can see that what we just did was created this property called num agents, and it has, in this case, a default value of 1 because that was the value of the property when we created the reference property. If we go back to my facility view and run in interactive mode, okay, we can see, let me speed up the run just a little bit. So let me go up here and say run to 5, speed it up just a little bit, and you can see that we still have capacity 1. In interactive mode, if I want to change that, I can just go, because I have defined the reference property, I now have the controls, and if I want it to be 5, for example, I can set the 5 as a model property, and now when the ticketing now has capacity 5, and so it can be serving 5 entities at any one time. We need to expand that to be able to see it, and so in interactive mode we can set the property values that way. So we now have our model basically complete, so we're going to go back to home. project home and create our experiment. So I just created an experiment and it created a default experiment, and you can see now our number of agents is set as an experimental control. So next what we need to do is create our two performance metrics. So I'm going to go click on add response, and let's call response 1 time in system, and let's use the sync value. So we can go to the expression builder, and I'm going to have departure, which is the name of my sync, time in system average. So it has my average time in system, and because I want to see it in minutes, I'm going to say the unit type is time and my unit of measure is minutes. And then we will do our second response. Our response was utilization, so I'll just call it util. So we only have one server, and now we will have ticketing, ticketing, capacity, scheduled utilization, and we don't have units for that. And so now, at this point, I would run and just make sure that we're actually getting values here. So we ran 10 replications, and you can see that we have time in system, and we have our utilization for our one agent scenario. Highly utilized and long time in the system. So clearly, for a good customer service anyway, we don't have enough agents. So we're going to define our three scenarios. So I'm just going to call this one S5, representing the 5 agents. So I can just set the property there. So, I'm going to call this one S6, representing the 6 agent scenario, and S7 representing the 7 agent scenario. I need to click reset because I changed this to 5, and this was computed based on the control value of 1. And now when I execute my model, I can now see the comparison. And as we would expect, as we increase the number of agents, the time in system decreases and the utilization also decreases. And that completes the basic workshop the basic workshop for comparing the 5, 6, and 7 agents. Possible enhancements to this, now that we have the model, this is something that you can try on your own, is you could use the symbol list for passengers to add some variety to the animation. So we could add multiple symbols for the agent, and then use the random selection on the source to select random images or random symbols for the arriving passengers. We can add frequent flyer passengers, so maybe we want to prioritize the queue in front of ticketing and have some random probability whether an arriving passenger is frequent flyer or not. So these are some possible enhancements that you should experiment with now that you have the base model.